In this video, we're going to continue on talking about descriptive research, and specifically we'll talk about content analysis and archival data. Just to remind you the different types of descriptive research we'll be talking about in this chapter, and again specifically we'll be covering content analysis and archival data in this video. So what is content analysis and archival research? First we'll start talking about content analysis, and this uses techniques of behavioral observation, so what we discussed in the previous video, to study social artifacts. So what kind of social artifacts are we talking about? Things like literature, movies, television programs, or other media that presents replicas of behaviors. And so content analysis measures specific events in these types of media. A simple one might be counting a word or phrase and how often that occurs in the literature or news articles or things like that. A more complicated one might be looking at how much crime appears in the news media, or what categories of news we see presented more or less. And so one example that I found was Messner and Kuki did a content analysis of Sports Center, and they started in 1989 and went through 2009. And so that was 5 separate periods. And what they wanted to know was look and see how much airtime was devoted to women's sports, just to better understand. And so you see here 1989, and this is network news, and you see it peaked in 1999, and then you see the steady downward decline to 2009. Same thing with Sports Center. So while it might seem like, okay, yeah, sure, of course there's less women's sports presented on the news, and especially Sports Center, than there are male sports, it's interesting to see this decline. And if we didn't do this content analysis, we wouldn't know that. So you are also going to do a content analysis, and I've made it into discussion. And so you'll go to this. Normally I would click on this link here in class, but it will take you to a Harry Potter theme. And there's a content analysis form that you'll fill out, and then you'll also submit your results to a Google form, just so everyone can see and kind of compare their results to everybody else. And then there's some questions to answer in the discussion. And so it's just a way for you to get a really good feel of what content analysis might be. Now, archival research looks at historical records or archives. And I'm just going to take you to a link to show you one example of where someone might go to do this archival research. So here we are at this webpage, and it's the Cummings Center for the History of Psychology. And I didn't even know this existed until a few weeks ago. But basically, if you go, they have a museum, they have all these different things. They're not open right now. But if you go in here and you look at the different items that they have, like if we go to artifacts, you go to browse artifacts. These are all different artifacts that they have that are related to different psychological research. They also have, if we go back, they also have sound recordings, they have books, they have moving images, so many different things. And so this is one place that people can go to do that archival type of research. So archival research measures behaviors or events that occurred in the past. It could be reanalyzing the Milgram experiment videos. Well, they weren't videos, recordings, I guess is a more proper term. And one thing that's, one example that I came across was trying to discover who little Albert was. If you remember this fear conditioning experiment that Watson and Rayner did, the question for a long time has been, who is this little boy? And I've heard different stories over the years. One story I heard when I was in college was that little Albert had grown up, and at the age of 30 they found him, and he was still afraid of all these white furry objects that they conditioned him to be afraid of. Then when I started teaching, I came across an article that said that he had been identified as this little boy, Douglas Merritt, and that he had died at the age of 6 due to hydrocephalus, which is sad, but it wasn't uncommon back then for children to die at an early age. And then in 2012, I came across an article that said that Watson and Rayner's research was all just completely off, because this little boy that they said died of hydrocephalus, that he had hydrocephalus from the time he was born. So he wasn't a normal, healthy child like they described in the research, and that will be needed to draw conclusions for the general population. Then, a few years later, again, this is all based off of archival research. A few years later, another group came out and said that this little boy was probably William Barger. He had been born on the same day as Marie. They had the same features. His mother was also a nurse at Johns Hopkins University. And he was known although his name was William Barger, he was known as Albert. That is what he was called his entire life. And so, while everyone thought that the Albert was something that Watson and Rayner had made up to keep his name confidential, in reality, perhaps he really they just used the name that what he was called. And then if you click on this link in the PowerPoint, it'll take you to an article that talks about little Albert. But and what this article doesn't say is that this group goes on and they hunt down where this William Barger would have lived, and they went out there, and he had his grandchildren were there, but they had never heard anything of this story about him being little Albert in the experiment, but they were kind of proud to think that it was him, and that they had a famous grandfather who had recently passed away, unfortunately.